Caleb Thorne knew the stories, of course. Every homesteader did. Whispers of the three Apache sisters, spirits of the canyon, who appeared in the beds of men who bought cursed land. He'd dismissed it as campfire nonsense, the kind of ghost story told to scare greenhorns. He wasn't a greenhorn. He was just a desperate man with a single shiny silver dollar and a need for a place to die in peace. But when he opened the door to his new, dilapidated cabin that night, the stories became horrifyingly real. They weren't ghosts. They were breathtakingly, terrifyingly beautiful women, their skin glistening in the faint moonlight. Their expressions, a chilling mask of cold, implacable resolve. They hadn't come for his soul. They'd come for the land, and the price of his dollar was a debt to be paid not in coin, but in blood, sweat, and perhaps something more. Caleb had two choices: run from the ghosts that had just become flesh, or face the ancient law of the canyon and pay the debt he never knew he'd inherited. He stood frozen in the doorway, the scent of dust and decay suddenly replaced by the clean, sharp smell of sage and something else, something like ozone after a lightning strike. The three women were perfectly still, a tableau of silent judgment. The one in the center, clearly the eldest, took a single deliberate step forward. She was taller than him, her features a masterpiece of sharp angles and fierce intelligence. Her black eyes didn't just look at him, they seemed to see through him, taking inventory of every failure, every loss, every scar on his soul. Behind her, the other two moved with a subtle, unnerving grace. One, slightly shorter, had a watchful, analytical gaze, her head tilted as if she were solving a complex puzzle. The youngest stood half in shadow, her fear a palpable thing, but her chin was held high with a resilience that belied her terror. "This is not your land," the eldest one said. Her voice was not loud, but it filled the small cabin, a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate in Caleb's very bones. "This is Anabigo, the place where the spirits rest, our place." She gestured to the dusty floor, a sweep of her hand that encompassed the entire canyon beyond the broken walls. "The last man who built here, his bones are now part of that dust. He paid with his life." Caleb's hand instinctively twitched toward the worn Colt at his hip, but the movement died before it began. He had come here to face the end, not to start a new war. He looked past her, at the empty hearth, the sagging cot, the life he had purchased for $1. A life of quiet erasure. "I don't want trouble," he said, his own voice sounding hollow and foreign. "Trouble is not something you want," the eldest sister replied, her lip curling with a cold disdain that somehow didn't feel cruel, merely factual. "It is something you buy, and you bought this trouble for $1 silver." She took another step, closing the distance until she stood directly before him. Her name, he would learn, was Yana. The one watching was Kaya. The one in the shadows was Alara. But for now, they were simply the debt. That coin was the final insult to a century of them. We are what remains, and we are here to collect. Caleb finally found the strength to meet her gaze. The primal part of him, the part that had survived ambushes and blizzards, screamed at him to draw, to fight, to blast his way out of this impossible supernatural trap. But the rest of him, the vast, empty expanse of the man he was now, felt something else, a strange, profound sense of correctness. Of course, the land had a price. Of course, his dollar was an insult. In a world that had taken everything from him, this demand felt like the only honest transaction he'd made in years. He slowly pulled his hand away from his gun, raising it slightly in a gesture not of surrender, but of acknowledgement. He was too tired to run, and the women before him, shimmering in the pale light, felt less like a threat and more like fate itself. His simple plan to fade into the dust of this forgotten canyon had been interrupted by the land's original inheritors. The land itself was claiming its price, and it had sent these three fierce, beautiful bailiffs to serve the notice. He had nothing left to lose, not even the life he had come here to discard. So he did the one thing they didn't expect, the thing that shattered their cold resolve and opened the first terrifying crack in their ancient law. He nodded. "All right," he said, the word cutting through the tension like a fresh blade. He accepted. The debt was servitude, and the first payment was survival. The well, a stone-lined wound in the earth, had been dry for a decade. The last of their water, stored in clay olaz, was nearly gone, the level dropping with each sunrise like a slow-motion execution. Yana saw it as a judgment. "The land thirsts," she declared, her gaze like flint as she stared at Caleb. "It finds you unworthy. It will kill us all to be rid of you." He didn't argue. An argument was a luxury for men with something to prove, and Caleb had only come here to disappear. He just nodded, picked up a forked branch of willow, and began to walk. Kaya, the watchers, followed him at a distance, her eyes narrowed with academic curiosity, while Alara watched from the cabin, a silent, hopeful shadow. He walked all day, the sun beating down on his worn hat, his boots cracking on the desiccated earth. He wasn't walking randomly, he was feeling. He held the willow branch loosely, a tool not of science, but of a deeper, older sense. It was his secret, the one piece of magic his father had taught him, the skill he now guarded as a bitter reminder of the things he couldn't do, the fevers he couldn't charm away. He felt the faint, almost imperceptible pull, a whisper from the deep rock, a thrum of life where there should only be death. That evening, a horseman appeared on the ridge, a lone silhouette against the blood-red sunset. He didn't approach, just watched. A vulture circling. Caleb recognized him as one of Marcus Blackwood's men. The message was clear. You are being watched. Your time is running out. The pressure was a physical weight, but Caleb ignored it. He walked to a spot behind the cabin where a cluster of stubborn, deep-rooted sage clung to life and drove the heel of his boot into the ground. "Here," was all he said. Yana scoffed, but Kaya, who had watched his methodical spiraling path all day, saw the logic in the madness. They dug. All through the night, their labored breaths mingling with the chirping of crickets, their muscles screaming in protest. Just before dawn, Caleb's shovel struck not rock, but damp, cool clay. An hour later, they hit the water. It wasn't a gush, but a slow, miraculous seep, filling the hole with dark, life-giving water. Alara wept with relief. Kaya watched Caleb with a new, profound respect. Yana, for the first time, said nothing at all. He had not won her over with words. He had won by bringing the dead land back to life. But as the sun rose, Caleb saw the fresh hoofprints on the ridge. The vulture had seen their miracle, and he knew it would be reported. He had solved one problem only to create a much, much deadlier one. The attack came a week later, not with a warning, but with the sudden sharp crack of a rifle that sent splinters flying from the cabin's doorframe. Blackwood hadn't sent one man this time. He'd sent 5, their faces grim, their intent absolute. The next hour was a blur of chaotic, desperate violence. The man who had come to the canyon to die found himself fighting with a ferocious, primal desperation he hadn't felt in years. He was no longer just protecting a piece of land, he was protecting the women who were its soul. He moved with a brutal efficiency, his Colt a thunderous extension of his will. But it was the sisters who turned the tide. Yana moved like a phantom with her bow, her arrows silent, deadly whispers. Alara, no longer the timid girl, reloaded Caleb's spare pistol with steady hands, and Kaya. Kaya fought like a cornered lioness, her knife a blur of silver, until a bullet tore through her shoulder, sending her crumpling to the ground. Seeing her fall ignited something in Caleb, a cold, pure rage. The fight was no longer about survival, it was about vengeance. When the last of Blackwood's men fled, Caleb rushed to Kaya's side. He carried her inside, laying her gently on the cot. Her breathing was shallow, her face pale with pain. As Yana and Alara worked to prepare poultices, Caleb carefully cut away the sleeve of her deerskin dress to get to the wound. His hands were steady, his focus absolute. But as the fabric fell away, his gaze froze. There, on the strap of her leather medicine bag, was a small, intricate pattern of beadwork, a 5-pointed star made of brilliant blue beads surrounded by a circle of red. It was a simple, beautiful design, and it was the exact same pattern his wife, Sarah, had stitched into the corner of the quilt that now lay folded at the foot of his bed in a distant, empty house. Sarah had told him the story 100 times, the one her own grandmother had told her. A story of a massacre, of a lone Apache girl who was the only survivor, who carried the pattern of her lost tribe in her memory like a sacred text. A massacre that happened at a forgotten place called Thorne's Folly. The air left Caleb's lungs. The debt wasn't for $1, it wasn't for land. He was living in a crypt, a memorial to his own wife's exterminated kin. These women weren't just the spirits of the canyon. They were Sarah's blood. They were his family. His purpose, the one he had been searching for in the bottom of a bottle in the silence of the prairie, had just been delivered to him in a hail of gunfire. He looked at Kaya's pale face, and the man who had come here to die was gone, replaced by a guardian who would kill to protect what remained. But he also knew, with a chilling certainty, that Blackwood wasn't just after water anymore. He was after the eradication of a bloodline. He was here to finish the job. The blow came not from a gun, but from a piece of paper. A week later, the territorial marshal, a man whose face was a tired mask of reluctant duty, rode up to the cabin. He wasn't alone. Marcus Blackwood sat on a fine black mare beside him, his expression one of smug, reptilian satisfaction. The marshal unfolded the document. It was an official court order, stamped and sealed, declaring the Apache claim on this land, legally extinguished 50 years prior, signed by a treaty Caleb knew had to be a forgery. The eviction notice was absolute. They had 1 week to vacate. To the law, Caleb was no longer a landowner. He was a common squatter, harboring dangerous fugitives. "It is the law, Thorne," the marshal said, his voice devoid of emotion. "You fight this, you hang." Blackwood just smiled. Yana's face, which had shown a flicker of trust after the battle, now hardened into a mask of pure, bitter defeat. "I told you," she whispered to Caleb after they left, her voice thick with the venom of a lifetime of broken promises. "The white man's law is a weapon. It is how they finish the wars their soldiers start." She began to gather their few belongings. "We will go. The land has chosen its master." Caleb stood there, the eviction notice feeling as heavy as a tombstone in his hand. Every instinct screamed at him that this was his past failure repeating itself. Just like with the fever that took Sarah and his son, he was helpless against an enemy he couldn't see, an enemy made of paper and lies. He had failed them. Now he was failing again. He had lost. It was over. As Yana disappeared into the cabin, Alara, the youngest, walked over to him. She didn't speak. She just looked at him with an unwavering faith that broke his heart. She bent down, picked up a small, smooth, gray stone from the edge of the new spring, and pressed it firmly into his hand, her small fingers closing his over it. It was still damp, cool, and heavy, a tiny, solid piece of the miracle they had made together. A glimmer. The stone was a cold, solid weight in Caleb's hand, a stark contrast to the flimsy, rustling sound of Yana packing inside the cabin. It was the sound of surrender, the sound his own heart had made for years. He closed his fist around the smooth, damp rock from the spring, and the coolness on his skin triggered not a thought, but a memory, clear and bright as a summer's day. It was Sarah's voice, telling him a story by the fire, her hands busy with a needle and thread. A story her grandmother had told her about the massacre. "They came with fire and guns," she'd said, her voice a soft murmur. "But the spirits of the spring protected the one who knew the secret. She didn't run. She went through the water, to the cave behind the waterfall. The cave behind the waterfall, the source of their new spring." Caleb's eyes snapped open. The eviction notice in his other hand suddenly felt insignificant, a piece of paper meant to obscure a deeper truth. He looked at the original deed he'd been given, the one that cost $1. It described the land meticulously. 160 acres of surface rock and dust. Surface. It said nothing of the water, nothing of the caves, nothing of what lay beneath. A plan, sharp and dangerous and breathtakingly clear, bloomed in his mind. He walked into the cabin. Yana didn't look up, her movements stiff with despair. "There is no point," she said. "The paper has spoken." "The paper lied," Caleb said, his voice ringing with a conviction that startled even himself. He didn't argue. He acted. He knelt before Kaya, whose shoulder was still bound, and placed the cool, wet stone on the small table beside her. Sarah's grandmother survived the massacre. She hid in a cave behind a waterfall. Kaya's analytical eyes widened, her quick mind grasping the connection instantly. Yana finally stopped, her back to them. Caleb continued, his words for her. Blackwood's deed is for the surface, for the dirt. We aren't going to fight him for the dirt. We are going to prove who owns the water, who owns the heart of this land. He looked at Yana, and for the first time, he didn't just see a fierce woman. He saw the last guardian of a sacred place. He was no longer a stranger. He was an ally. After a long, silent moment, Yana turned, her eyes burning with a new, terrifying hope. Show us, she commanded. The entrance was hidden behind a thick curtain of spring water, a shimmering veil that disguised the narrow opening in the rock. Inside, the air was cool and still, holding the silence of centuries. It was not one cave, but a system, a protected labyrinth carved by the water itself, and on the walls, illuminated by the flickering light of their pine tar torches, was the proof. Generations of history were painted in ochre and charcoal, handprints of children, star charts mapping the heavens, and on the deepest wall, in a sacred chamber, was a family lineage, a series of symbols and figures that ended with 3 small new marks, painted by a grandmother for the granddaughters she would never get to see. They had found it, not a claim on paper, but a testament etched in stone, an irrefutable legal and spiritual deed that predated any treaty, any court, any dollar. The confrontation took place in the territorial judge's chambers, a room that smelled of dry paper and cigar smoke, a world away from the living rock of the canyon. Marcus Blackwood was there, flanked by his lawyer, his face a smug mask of confident ownership. He presented his forged treaty, his legal documents, his vision of progress. Then Caleb, flanked by the 3 sisters, stepped forward. He didn't present an argument, he presented a history. Kaya, her arm in a sling, carefully laid out the artifacts they had found in the cave tools, beadwork, a child's toy, her quiet competence more damning than any accusation. Yana, holding a torchlit drawing of the family lineage, translated the story on the wall, her voice not pleading but teaching, her authority absolute. Caleb presented his final simple point. Judge, he said, Mr. Blackwood's deed is for 160 acres of surface land. He does not own the spring, for the spring is not on the land. It comes from within it. And within it is their home. It has been for 1,000 years. The judge, a hard but fair man, examined the evidence, his face grim. The truth was undeniable. Blackwood's claim, built on a foundation of lies and murder, crumbled to dust. This court, the judge began, his voice booming in the silent room, finds your claim to be fraudulent, Mr. Blackwood. Ruined, his empire of deceit shattered, Blackwood's mask of civility finally broke. He lunged, not at Caleb but at Yana, his face contorted in a snarl of pure hatred. It was his last mistake. Yana moved with a blur of motion, a knife appearing in her hand as if from thin air. It was over in a single, precise, and final act of justice. The circle was closed. Years later, the ranch was no longer known as Thorne's Folly. It was called Anabigo, and it was a sanctuary. The spring Caleb had uncovered now fed a small, thriving community, a place of safety for those who had been broken by the world. The cabin had been rebuilt, strong and warm, the heart of a home that now included several smaller dwellings. Caleb Thorne, now an old man with lines of peace etched around his eyes, sat in his rocking chair on the porch. He watched Alara's 2 children, a boy with his mother's dark eyes and a girl with a spirit as bright and fierce as Yana's, playing by the creek that flowed from the spring. They were a new generation, a new bloodline, a blending of worlds. Caleb finally understood. He had come to this canyon to find a quiet grave, a place to let his own broken line end. He looked at the children, living proof of a future he never thought possible. And he knew. The land had collected its debt. It had taken his dollar, his despair, his isolation, and in return, it had given him what he had lost so long ago, a family, a purpose, and a legacy that would flow as long as the spring itself.